A big challenge in many applications is to get your logs from a diverse set of applications into a central location in an automated manner. In this video we're going to look at a tool called Fluentd, which is a log shipper, and Fluentd is designed to collect these logs from different sources and ship them to different locations such as BetterStack. And in between the collection and shipping of these logs, Fluentd also allows you to transform the logs, for example to parse them from one data type to another, or to add or remove data that's being sent in your logs. And Fluentd offers a rich ecosystem of plugins to enable you to do this. In this video we're going to see how we can ship Apache web server logs from the Linux file system to BetterStack, where they can be centralized and analyzed effectively. We'll dive into how Fluentd is configured and how we can set up sources and destinations for this. If you're enjoying this content, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to BetterStack for more, and let's dive in. So let's start with a look at the Fluentd documentation. Fluentd is an open source data collector for a unified logging layer. What Fluentd allows you to do is unify data collection and consumption of your logs for better use and understanding of data. Now we're going to start by installing Fluentd on our operating system. There's an installation section on the documentation, and I'm going to install this on an Ubuntu distribution on Linux. But if you want to install on Mac OS or Windows or other Linux distributions, you're going to find some links here on the left hand sidebar. Now we're going to start by installing the Fluent package Debian package, as opposed to this one here called 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗀, and that's maintained by another organization. But if you want the stable Fluentd distribution, you can install Fluent package for that. Now if you look at what Fluent package is, it's a service that's written in Ruby, and some performance sensitive parts are written in C. However, as it says here, some users may have difficulty installing and operating a Ruby daemon, and that's why the Fluentd project provides this stable distribution called Fluent package. Now if you want to know more about 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗀 you can look at this section here. What we're going to do is go down to the installation section on this documentation. And as I said, we're on Linux Ubuntu, and I'm running that on Windows subsystem for Linux. And what we're going to do is install for this version of Ubuntu, Ubuntu 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗀, and that's version 22 of Ubuntu, which is the LTS at the time of recording. So what I'm going to do is install the Fluent package version 5 by copying this link, and we're going to open a terminal here on our Linux distribution, and I've got a directory where we can paste that command in, and that's a curl command that's going to go and install Fluentd on this operating system. Now after you've installed that, you're going to get the message here, installation completed, happy logging. And if you happen to be on Ubuntu version 20, you can install it for Ubuntu Focal, and that's this link here. There will be a link to this documentation just below the video. Now after we've run that curl command, we can go back to the terminal, and we're going to run a command here just to make sure that Fluentd has been installed, and we can run the Fluentd command with the version flag. And you can see we get back version 5.0.2 of Fluent package, so it's been installed correctly on Linux. So now that we have Fluent package installed, let's go back to the browser, and we're going to look at this BetterStack guide on collecting, processing and shipping log data with Fluentd. And again, we've got a link to this below the video. If we scroll down here, there's a sidebar on the left here, and I want to go to this section that tells us how Fluentd works. So let's click that and we get taken to this section. And this diagram encapsulates what Fluentd does in a nutshell. On the left hand side of this diagram, we're taking the logs from different sources in our infrastructure, and that might be Apache log files, it could be application logs for different services that we're running, as well as system logs such as authentication logs and syslog files, and also messages from databases. Fluentd will collect data from all of these different sources that you set up, and then it will perform some optional filtering and buffering of that data, and you can also enrich the data with new information or also remove data from those logs. And then after that process, it's going to forward those logs onto different destinations, and examples of that might be a MongoDB database or a MySQL database, or you might want to send your logs to Amazon S3 for archiving, and you might want to send the logs to BetterStack where you can consolidate them in a central location for analysis. Now to understand Fluentd, you can visualize it as a pipeline. Fluentd will capture logs from multiple sources at one end of the pipeline, and it will transform them into a standardized log event format, and those logs can be processed, enriched or filtered according to your requirements. And then finally, at the end of the pipeline, Fluentd can efficiently forward those log events to various destinations for in-depth analysis, and that encapsulates what's going on in this diagram above. Now to implement this concept, what we can do is configure Fluentd by defining our log sources, our transformations and destinations in a fluentd.conf configuration file, and that will be located in the /etc/fluentd directory, or if you've installed 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗀 Fluentd, it will be located in this directory here. Now what we want to do is we want to go to fluentd.conf and define these sources, transformations and destinations. Now this is very similar to what we did in the vector video, and that should be appearing on the screen now. So if you want to see an alternative to Fluentd for log shipping, you can check that out. What we're going to do is go to this fluentd.conf file, and we're going to define the directives that you can see here on the page. So we have a block for any sources that we want to collect logs from, and then we have a block for any filters that we want to apply to those collected logs. And notice the tag that's been added here, so we can add tags as we're going to see very soon. And finally we have a block here defined using the match directive, and as it says below, these are the destinations where Fluentd should forward the processed logs. Now if you want more information, you can look at this section here. We have input plugins for Fluentd. For example, if we want to read log events from the end of a file, we can use the tail input plugin. The syslog plugin allows us to collect logs from the syslog protocol, and the HTTP plugin allows us to provide log events through a REST endpoint. And we also have plugins for processing or filtering the data. For example, if you want to filter log events that match a pattern, you can use the grep filter plugin. And if you need to modify log events, there's a filter record transformer plugin for that purpose. And the final thing to look at before we start actually writing a configuration file for Fluentd is the output plugins. So if you want to output to a file, there is a plugin for that. And if you want to forward your logs over the network to destinations that are remote, you can use the HTTP output plugin for that. So let's define the task for this video. If we open the terminal, what I'm going to do is clear what we have here, and I want to go to the /var/log directory, and let's list out what we have in that directory. We have a directory here called Apache 2, and this contains the log files for the Apache web server that's installed on this Ubuntu system. So let's cd into Apache 2, and if we again list out what's here, we have the access log and the error log for Apache. We're going to use Fluentd to collect the logs from the access log. We're then going to transform that Apache log format into JSON format, and we'll also see how to remove certain keys from the log output. And then finally, we're going to send those logs on to BetterStack, and that's all going to be done using Fluentd. Now we can check to make sure that Apache is running, so we can use the sudo systemctl command for this. And we're going to get the status of Apache 2, and we can see that it's now active, so we should be able to send requests to localhost and get back the Apache page. We're going to test that out now by going to the browser, and if we go to localhost, you can see we get the default page for Apache web server. Now the interesting thing, when we send a request, it's going to send the details of that request to this access.log file. So let's cat the contents of that file to the terminal, and you can see the request that just came in there at the bottom. So the goal here is going to be to collect the logs from this file, which is going to be the source for Fluentd, and then we're going to define a block to forward that to BetterStack. So let's start by going to the file, the configuration file for Fluentd, and remember that was in the /etc/fluent directory. So let's list out what we have here, and we can see the fluentd.conf file, and we're going to edit that in a second. I'm going to cat the default contents of this file out to the terminal, and we have quite a bit of configuration in the file by default. We don't actually need any of that, so what I'm going to do is clear the terminal, and we're going to run the truncate command in Linux, and we're going to truncate the fluentd.conf file to 0 bytes by using this command here. After we've done that, if we cat the contents, we get nothing back, so we now have an empty fluentd.conf file, and we can edit that using an editor such as nano. So I'm going to run the sudo nano command, and we're going to edit the fluentd.conf file. Now let's start by defining a source here, and we can close that block off at the bottom. And when we define a source, we need to give it a plugin type. So we use this directive here, type, and because we're going to read from the access.log file, we're going to give this the tail input type. And what the tail type is going to do is continuously track a particular file on the system to read any new data that's coming into that file, and that's similar to the tail-f command in Linux. And because we're reading from a file, we need a path here, and that's the /var/log directory, and it was the Apache 2 directory within that. And let's just track the access.log file for now. Now the next directive I want to define is pos_file, and to understand this, let's go to the documentation for the tail input plugin. And you can see the example configuration here where we have a path to a particular file, And then we have the POS file defined in this source block. Now on the right hand side you can see the different parameters that we can use with the 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝘀 plugin. And this one here, POS file, we're going to click that. And as it says here, it's highly recommended to define this. And what this file does is it defines where Fluentd will record the position that it last read from the given file. So this essentially provides Fluentd with a small amount of state so that Fluentd knows where it last read from the file and it doesn't repeat that data. Now let's go back to the top of this documentation, and you can see the POS file here is stored in the /var/log directory, and then we have a directory called td_agent, and within that we have the name of the file with a .pos extension. So we're going to define something similar in this configuration file. It's in /var/log/td_agent, and then it's going to be an access.log.pos file within that directory. Now because we have an Apache log of a particular format, we're going to define a block here called parse, and we can close that off just below. And inside this we're going to define a type called Apache2. So to understand what that's doing, let's go back to the documentation again, and you can see that here in this example configuration for the 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗀, we're essentially telling Fluentd to read the incoming log with the format that we expect from an Apache log file. So we can go to the parse section of the documentation by clicking this button, and some of the Fluentd plugins support this parse section that specifies how to parse the raw data. And we can see a list of some of these by clicking this link here. That's going to take us to a page on these plugins. If we look at the list of parsers that are built into Fluentd, we can see one for Apache 2 as well as Apache Error. And we also have parsers for Nginx, syslog, CSV, JSON, and so on. And if we need to pull out data in a particular format, we have a parser for regular expressions. So a lot of flexibility into how you can build up these parsers on the incoming input data. Now let's go back to the terminal, and we have one final parameter that we want to use in the input tail. We're going to define a tag for the source, and I'm going to give it a tag of betterstack.apache.access. Now what you can do in Fluentd is you can define all of these sources with different tags, and you can then perform transformations and routing of your inputs based on these tags. And we're going to see an example of that right now. So we have the source defined. We're going to now define a destination for these incoming Apache logs, and we can do that with the match directive here, and we can close that off at the bottom. If we want to match on a particular tag, we can pass a regular expression pattern to the match directive. So I'm going to pass betterstack, and that can be followed by any number of characters, and that is going to match this tag that we defined for the source above. And what that means is that whatever we define here in this match is going to be applied to this data coming in from the source because the tag is matching. So what do we want to do to that incoming Apache log data? For now, we're just going to output to standard output, and we can do that with the standard output plugin, and that's going to send any logs that are coming into this destination to standard output. Now that's all we want to do for the initial version of fluentd.conf. So let's get out of this file and save it. And before we run the Fluentd process, it's a good practice to validate this configuration file. And we can do that by running the fluentd command. And I'm going to pass the --dry run parameter to this. And that's going to run the program, but it's not actually going to perform any movement of the logs. All that command is going to do is validate that your configuration file is as expected. And if you get back this text here all in green with no issues, then you know that everything is fine, and we can actually test out the process now with the fluentd command. Now Fluentd, when you install it using that curl command, it can be installed as a systemd unit. So for example, sudo system control, and we can check the status of the fluentd daemon. And you can see that that is currently active, which means it's going to be running in the background. What we're going to do is actually stop this daemon, and we can do that using the systemctl stop command. And the reason for that is because we want to run these processes manually using the fluentd command directly. Obviously on a real server, you would have this running in the background and collecting these logs in the background so that you as a developer or a system administrator don't even need to think about that. But we're just going to run it manually for now. So let's run the fluentd command here. And we're getting this text at the bottom, and you can see that the program is now waiting for input, and it's going to collect any input, any logs that are sent to the Apache access.log file. So let's go back to the browser, and what I'm going to do is go back to the Apache default page, and I'm going to minimize this a bit so that it's a bit smaller, and we can see on the left hand side that as I refresh the page, these logs are being collected by Fluentd and they appear on the terminal. And every time that we refresh, Fluentd is going to collect that data from the access.log file, and it's going to send it to the terminal because we configured our output destination to be standard output. And one thing to note about this is that you can see that the Apache log data has been converted from that plain text Apache format to some JSON data here with keys and values. So it's converted it from an unstructured text format to structured data with keys and values that you can then extract pieces of information from much more easily. And the reason that we're now getting that kind of structured data is because Fluentd understands how to parse the Apache logs. And if we go back to the fluentd.conf file, the reason for that is because we have this parse block that tells Fluentd that the incoming logs are going to be in that format. Now what we're going to do now is change the output destination for the transformed logs. So instead of sending them to standard output, we're going to send them to BetterStack, and that's going to allow us to have a better developer and system administrative experience by providing a web UI where we can collect all of these Apache logs in a structured format and perform analysis of those logs. And we can also do things like troubleshooting and alerting if any particular log events occur using BetterStack. So that's better than just having all this data lying on a Linux file system. What we're going to do is go back to the browser here, and there's a page here on sending logs to BetterStack using Fluentd. Now there's a link to this page below the video. We've already installed Fluentd on the server, and we've already set up our input plugin for the Apache access log. We're now going to install the BetterStack plugin, and because we're not using td agent, we're going to use this command here, which uses the fluent gem command to install the Fluent plugin logtail. So let's copy this command and go back to the terminal, and I'm going to quit out of our fluentd.conf file and paste that command in. And we're getting a permission issue here, so let's clear the terminal, and we're going to run this with super user privileges with the sudo command. And once that's completed, we should now be able to use the BetterStack plugin for Fluentd. But before we do that, we're going to go back to the browser again and go to the BetterStack platform, and let's go to the logs and metrics section. Now if you need to create a new source, you can use this button at the top right. I already have a source here called Fluentd demo, so we're going to use that in this video. And what we can do in order to get the source token is go to the configure section, and if we scroll down here, we have a source token that we can copy and use within our applications. And when you create a new source, you should automatically be given that token. Now the reason we need the source, if we go back to the documentation on setting up an output to BetterStack, when we do this using Fluentd, we're going to define a match block for that output, and that's going to have a type of the new logtail plugin that we just installed, and we also need to add the source token here using that parameter. Now what we're going to do is copy this block here, but before we do that, we can fill it in with the correct source token by selecting the Fluentd demo source. And you can see that's filled in the parameter with the correct token, so we can now copy the entire match block. And let's go back to the terminal here, and we're going to go back to the fluentd.conf file, and we're going to edit that with nano. Now that opens the file that we had before, so let's remove the match block that we had that was outputting to standard output. And we've pasted the new one in here with the token, as well as the type of logtail. Now let's save this and go back to the terminal, and again we can run the dry run command to make sure that the file is validated. And if all is good with that, we can run fluentd, and then that's going to start tracking that access.log file. So if we go back to the browser and generate some requests for that access file, that's then going to be sent to BetterStack, hopefully using Fluentd because of that new configuration. So let's get back to the BetterStack platform, and we're going to go to the live tail of these logs. And you can see at the bottom we have some new input logs coming in here, and this has structured keys and values. For example, for the user agent, for the HTTP status code, we also have the date time, the host, the HTTP method, and also the URL path for the request. That has all been extracted from the Apache access log, which is in an unstructured text format. Fluentd has used the Apache 2 parser to convert that to JSON, and then we've defined that match block that's sending those logs over the network to this BetterStack source. And the good thing about Fluentd, if we go back to the terminal and look at the configuration file, we can have as many of these different sources as we want. So as well as an Apache access log, we could also collect logs from a syslog file or from some Nginx logs, and even collect logs from our own custom services and Docker containers. And we could send all of that to BetterStack for consolidation and for analysis. So Fluentd gives you an automated way of collecting that data from diverse sources, and then processing that log data in some way before forwarding it on to BetterStack, where we can then perform our analysis. Now let's finish this video with an example of how to redact sensitive information from the log outputs. And let's go back to the BetterStack guide on Fluentd. And on the left hand sidebar, there's a section on transforming logs with Fluentd. So after Fluentd collects your logs, processing and manipulating the records often becomes necessary. And this process can involve transforming unstructured logs in plain text into structured formats such as JSON or log format. And these structured formats are easier for machines to parse. But as well as that, Fluentd allows you to perform other types of transformations. For example, you might want to enrich the logs with new information, you might want to remove unwanted data, or you might want to mask sensitive information to ensure privacy. For these purposes, Fluentd provides a range of filter plugins that allow you to manipulate the event streams. Now if we go back to the live tail on BetterStack, let's just say that the host was some kind of sensitive information and we didn't want to expose that for whatever reason. And of course this makes more sense if we have user information here or IP addresses that you might want to hide from the log outputs that are being sent to your destinations. So using our example of Apache and transforming that to JSON and then sending it to BetterStack, how would we redact a particular key from that output? Again, let's go back to the BetterStack guide and we're going to go to this section on adding and removing fields with Fluentd. This section shows how you can enhance data privacy by removing sensitive information from log entries. What we're going to do is just look at the example here. What we define is a filter block, and that filter has a plugin type of record transformer. And within that plugin we have a parameter called remove keys, and that specifies a key name of email address. And just as before, these filters can be applied based on tags. So this tag here says file.logs, and that was the tag given to the above source, as you can see here. So with that, let's go back to the Fluentd configuration file and we're going to edit that with nano. And in between the source and the match block, let's define a filter block. And again, we're going to take any tag that starts with BetterStack and we're going to match all of those here. And we can close off this filter tag below. Now we're going to define the same type of plugin here for this filter, and that's going to be a plugin of record transformer. And remember, we specified we wanted to remove a particular key, so we're going to use the remove keys parameter, and the key that we wanted to remove from that JSON output was the host key. So let's now save this and go back to the terminal, and again we can perform that dry run to validate the configuration file, and it looks like all is good with that. So what we're going to do is clear the terminal, and finally we can run the Fluentd command, and that again is going to start tracking the Apache access log. So let's go back to the browser and go back to the default page, and if we now go back to the BetterStack live tail, we can go to the bottom of this and we can look at the newest entries that are coming into the platform. And as an example, this one here, you can see it does not have that host key in the outputted JSON. So we still get all of the other data like the agent and the status code, but the host key that we had above, if we look at this record here, that has been removed, and that's because of our Fluentd configuration file. We defined that filter with the type of record transformer, and we removed the key called host from the log data that was being sent on to BetterStack. And one of the big benefits of having the logs centralized like this is that we can very easily search through them for particular pieces of information. And just to demonstrate that, what I'm going to do is go back to the Apache default page, and I've generated a request to a URL that's not present on this server, and that's going to return a 404 not found. And if we go back to BetterStack now, on the platform, if we jump to the live tail of these, let's expand the one at the bottom and you can see that the code is 404. Now one thing you might want to do if you're collecting Apache data is you might want to search for any requests that are failing with a particular status code. So if I go to the top, there's a search bar and we can look for fields that exist in the data for this source, and one of them is the code, so we can click that. And if we wanted to find any requests that are failing with a 404, we can type the status code in there and then click search, and it's going to return all of the log entries where the status code matched that particular value. And this works not only with equalities, but if we wanted to find any HTTP status code that was not equal to 200, let's say, we can also perform that search as well, and that's going to again return any status that was not HTTP status code 200. So as soon as you get your logs to BetterStack, whether it's using Fluentd or Vector or any other type of application, you can then very easily do this searching and you can build dashboards and analyze the logs, as well as set up alerts if anything happens that you want to alert administrators about very quickly. So that's all for this video. We've learned about the Fluentd service for collecting logs from different sources, and then optionally transforming those logs and then sending them on to destinations. In this video we used BetterStack as a destination, but this will also work with services like MongoDB or MySQL, and you can set up any number of destinations using Fluentd. And if this content's been useful, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more, and we'll see you in the next video.